So, having said that, let me say, or let me begin by giving you a brief history of the linkages that we're trying to make here. We will have to go back to 15th century at least, because to basically go over a few historical processes so that we see the relevance of the space we are and how that relates to the questions that we're raising in this program. Uh, well, first of all, and there are many things I'm going to say here that I don't have the time to really develop in detail right now. But the first one is the RE of the Reconquista. Okay, this is a mythology that has been built over centuries about a supposedly Islamic invasion of Spain, of which the the Catholic monarchy was basically in a defensive war reconquering the Spain. This is the way it's portrayed in history books still today in Spain, but worldwide. This is part of the narrative of the West, okay? That there has been historically a Muslim invasion of the West, and this imaginary it carries on into the present, okay? And the facts are quite different from what they are presented in the history books that were written fundamentally by the people who basically won the war at the end of the 15th century and all the way to the 16th century and till today. Basically, the narrative is that there was a Muslim invasion of Spain in the 8th century. The reality is that, first of all, Spain did not exist in the 8th century. So let's assume the narrative that there was really an Islamic invasion of Spain. Okay, if even if you take for granted that statement, there was no Spain in the 8th century. So if they were invading something, it was not Spain. Okay? It was something else. Okay, so let's begin from there. There was a Visigoth ruling of this territory together with the church, and so that ruling, there was the bishops of the church together with the Visigoth elites. You say Visigoth in English?
Yes.
Yeah, the Visigoths. So they were basically ruling. That was the dominant elites class, whatever, of this territory that we call today Spain. At that time, it had many names. Still today, it has many names. But the narrative that this is all Spain is also another colonial narrative, because as we know, there are many nationalities inside this territory with different languages, etc. Still today. And the struggles about this are still ongoing. Okay? If you read the press, you will see this every day. And so at that moment there was no Spain. The same way that today there's no Spain either, because there is a plurality of spaces here that you cannot call it Spain as such. Okay, there is more to the territories that cannot be collapsed in this identity called Spain. There are many identities. And what happened was that at that moment there were 7,000 troops coming from the south, led by Tariq, entering the south of Spain in, I believe it was 711, okay, in the early 8th century. And when they entered the territory, I mean, to make a long story short, you have, apart from having elites that were Visigoths, that Spanish was not the language, okay? Let's also clarify this. There were many languages in this territory, and the elites, the Visigoths, did not speak Spanish the way we know it contemporary. They spoke other languages, and so this idea that there's a Spain in the 8th century, I mean, the way it was in the late 15th century, the way it is today, is really a big jump, in terms of historical evidence. And there was also Iberian people here, which were indigenous to this land, and there were many who spoke different languages too. And there were Christians, but Christians that practiced a form of Christianity that was the pre-Constantine Christianity. You know that Constantine is the first ruler of the Roman Empire who takes Christianity as the dominant ideology of the empire. That's when Christianity, from being an anti-imperialist movement, spirituality, etc., became the ideology of the Roman Empire. And it was appropriated by the Roman Empire. Okay? And that turned Christianity into Christendom. So I want to make a distinction between Christianity as a spirituality, as a practice, and Christendom, which is when Christianity becomes state ideology. And till today, you have Christendom running parallel to Christianity. Okay, so I want to make that distinction. Christianity is not the same as Christendom, and vice versa. So that distinction is important to keep in mind. Now, the Christianity of the first 4 centuries after Christ, before Constantine. Remember, Constantine was the emperor of Rome 4 centuries after Christ. The first 4 centuries, that Christianity did not have the notion of the Trinity, did not have the notion of Jesus, the Son of God, but Jesus as a prophet. So when you go over what they were saying and doing, it was very similar, okay, in many ways to what later became to be known as Islam, okay, as the last revelation, okay, and so there was a notion of unity. The dualism of Christendom was not there, okay. It was more the idea of unity, the idea of unity as a central concept. Is with Constantine that you have the Trinity, you have the God, the Spirit, the Son, and you have the dualism between the material world and the spiritual world and all these things. And these things were part of a, let's put it this way, power ideology that was fundamental for the rulers of the time, and not only at that time, but it was very useful later on today, to keep this dualism alive and split the material world from the spiritual world and so on. I mean, we're going to be discussing this over the next 2 weeks, because this is related also to the questions of secularism, religiosity, and these binaries that have been built till today, and linked to questions of basically dualism that you see between mind and body and so on. I mean, this is a very, very important intellectual, important political move with intellectual effects. And so when the 7,000 Muslim troops entered from the south, you have to think that they didn't have airplanes, they didn't have motorized vehicles, they didn't have anything like that. So how come within 60 days they have mostly liberated most of the Iberian Peninsula, and within 3 years they basically have beat up the power of the Visigoths, okay, within 3 years. So there are now new historians looking at this period and questioning the idea of the Reconquest, because the Reconquest, if there was a Muslim conquest, how come without motor vehicle, airplanes, etc., it was done so fast? So people who have been looking at the history have found that what happened was that people got together and united with the Muslims to beat up the power of the Visigoths and beat up the power of the bishops. So in a sense, what happened here in the 8th century was in 3 years, there was a war of liberation from the Visigoth power and the bishop power. And basically, the church was isolated in mountains in the north, okay, called Covadonga. In Covadonga, you have in those mountains the last remaining power of the church, and they went there after being beat up over the whole territory of the Iberian Peninsula. Okay, so basically, what was the last remaining space of the power of Visigoths and the church. Now, it took them, if it was a war of, let's put it this way, of conquest, first, how come it was so fast without having vehicles, airplanes, or anything like that? Okay? And second, it took the Spanish Christian monarchy, it took them 800 years, okay, to, in a sense, take over the territory. So if it was, let's put it this way, a conquest, where the hearts of the people were not with the presence of the Muslims, it would have been in a matter of maybe decades, or maybe it would be very fast before the Christian would have taken over again the territory. But something else happened there. And what happened was that the spirituality of the different groups were very, very close to the message of Islam, because the Iberian people, indigenous people, they also have a notion of unity that was very much tied to the notion of Tawhid in Islam.